Hello, everybody. Today, we are going to be briefly discussing communication disorder awareness. My name is Allison Buraker, and I'm here with Kia McKibben. We are second-year graduate students at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. So our agenda today is that we are going to have a brief introduction to communication disorders, which will then lead us to talking about the life impact and hearing personal stories from people who have communication disorders. Then we are going to be talking about the importance of awareness and sort of wrapping up this presentation by providing you all with resources at the end of the survey. So let's get started on what is a communication disorder. So a communication disorder is an impairment in the ability to receive, send, process, and comprehend concepts or verbal, nonverbal, and graphic symbol systems. An example of a graphic symbol system is the AAC board you see at the bottom right corner. Now, communication disorders, they can range in severity and life impact, as well as they can be developmental or acquired after birth. But it is mainly important to remember that no experience of a communication disorder is completely identical to another person's. So there are three primary types of communication disorders, and we are going to start with speech disorders. A speech disorder is an impact on how someone produces sounds that make words, the rate or rhythm that words are spoken, or the qualities of one's voice, such as their loudness or pitch. So an example of a speech disorder would be if somebody was producing the T sound t for the K sound k. So the example would be somebody saying tat for cat. We are now going to listen to Jordan, who is a person who has verbal apraxia. This is a type of speech disorder, and verbal apraxia, otherwise known as apraxia of speech, is the inability to plan movement of speech.
I get into anything else, the underlying question is always, what is verbal apraxia? Well, verbal apraxia is also known as childhood apraxia of speech, apraxia of speech. So many different terms, but let's just stick with verbal apraxia. Verbal apraxia is a neurological brain disorder where your brain has trouble sending your mouth signals for accurate movements of speech, meaning words don't always come out, and that's really frustrating, and sometimes, frankly, it sucks. And then once you do get the word out at times, the word may not always be what you intended to say. It might sound distorted. Some people might say you sound robotic or anything like that. So this is something that is very frustrating for the person.
Another type of communication disorders are language disorders, and these are the impact on how someone understands or uses spoken or written language. The language is a system of how we use the words that we speak. So an example of this would be if somebody were to come up to you and say, "She dog at the photograph," you would know that that does not make sense. However, if somebody were to approach you and say, "She looked at the photograph of the dog," that would make sense. The final type of communication disorder is hearing disorders, and these are the differences in the auditory system that may impact comprehension and or the production of speech and language. And hearing disorders, these can impact how one detects, recognizes, processes, and responds to the sounds around them. An example of having a hearing disorder or a hearing loss would be if somebody were to go into a very noisy setting, such as a restaurant, they would then have difficulties recognizing and detecting sounds when in that environment.
So to better understand communication disorders, let's discuss a couple of additional components that are outside of speech, language, and hearing that can impact communication as a whole. So looking at what a speech language pathologist does, or a speech therapist, can be a really helpful tool in understanding what has the power to impact communication. So we discussed discussed language and speech as two. A third one could be feeding and swallowing, and this includes working with the chewing and swallowing mechanisms or swallowing disorders that can impact quality of life through nutritional and health deficits across the lifespan. An example of a swallowing disorder may be if someone chokes or has difficulty safely eating or drinking food and water. Another one is literacy, which includes reading and writing and can impact reading, spelling, and sharing ideas. So reading is always a way that we learn from others, explore new ideas, share thoughts, similar to what we do with spoken communication. So let's think about it. What are 3 routine activities in your daily life that might be impacted by literacy? Something else would be voice. So of course, we must also think about how our thoughts come out. Voice is what our voices sound like, and not only do speech therapists help with voice disorders, such as nodes or laryngeal cancer, but also with gender affirming voice therapy, primarily for transgender individuals. We also have cognitive communication, which works with how our brain informs communication through components like memory, attention, problem solving, and thinking skills. An example that demonstrates cognition is your ability to remember words across a conversation, fill in a blank clock, for example, or remember and repeat a series of numbers like 9, 2, 8, 1, 4. We also have fluency, which may include stuttering, and is how our speech flows and the challenges that come with sometimes getting out an intended message. So we'll soon be hearing from another speaker about what communication might be like for a person who stutters. The last part I'm going to touch on is social communication, which is how we follow unspoken rules in communication, like taking turns, facial expressions, what tone of voice may mean. And it's also how we form relationships through communication. So let's listen to someone now who talks about how autism impacts social communication in her life.
With that. And I think early on, I can speak for myself personally. I did exhibit many traits. I was stimming often. I loved to twirl, rock back and forth, clap, a lot of those things. I also did not understand humor, especially sarcasm or any dry humor like that. But even just small jokes that you would normally tell children, I wouldn't laugh at, and I would take everything very seriously. I also was an early reader. Not every person on the spectrum is an early reader, but that can be a sign. In addition to that, I struggled to make relationships with my peers. I think maybe it's something that some parents might not know to look for is migraine. I started getting migraines in the 1st or 2nd grade. And that
So autism is defined as a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects how people communicate, learn, and behave and socially interact. So in that video, Laura and Melissa discussed some of the ways that autism impacted her as a child. And though she only briefly mentioned its impact on her communication, it was good to think about ways in which others' behaviors could impact the ways in which you can communicate with them. So communication, as we understand, plays an unmeasurable role in our lives. Any deviations from typical communication can not only play a role in one's ability to express themselves, but how others communicate and interact with them. Communication is something that's reciprocal. So when the ability to communicate is impacted by a communication disorder, for example, there can be a broad implication to that. Someone may be impacted by the resources that they have for the opportunity to communicate in the way that they want or that they need to, or someone may be impacted by the ways that others respond to or are unable to support them and their communication differences. So there are 3 domains that we'll briefly discuss here regarding the significance of life impact on those that are affected with communication disorders. So the first is educational settings. Educational settings should always be designed to empower and support all students. We each learn differently and require different support for the opportunity to reach an outcome. And those with communication disorders need support in areas like literacy, social communication, or language, as a few examples. So when these areas of attention are not addressed, it has the power to impact every component of their educational experience. Students should be given the opportunity to feel safe, comfortable to learn, and have the resources to do so effectively. And as an example, research from 2014 explored the disproportionate representation of adolescents with learning disabilities involved in juvenile court as a result of school-related behavior and discipline problems. So when students are not provided with the appropriate supports that they need to feel able, comfortable, and motivated to learn, an educational setting is not always a safe and encouraging environment for them. So next we'll take a look at another example, which is stuttering. So individuals who stutter will experience it in a variety of different ways. Here we have our speaker, Ninchai Navalme, who explains the experience of stuttering and what it was like in the school setting and the way that it impacted her willingness and desire to communicate in that setting.
So I went through middle school. I also went through high school and elementary school. I was trying to say elementary. Yeah, y'all saw how it took me forever. Yeah, so I went to all those, like throughout all those years and stuff like that. And I never really like was aware of my stuttering. Like I knew I had it. I knew that, it was the worst thing in the world. I knew that I did not want it. I knew that I just wanted it to go away, but I never really took the initiative to try to see, if there's something like that I can do that's different, that I can do that can actually help me out a little bit, stuff like that. Like I wouldn't be the one who would, speak or raise their hands to ask questions. That was not me. Like I promise I especially in class, if I had a question and I know that I had a question or if I did know the answer to a question, I would not be the one to raise my hand. No, like I would keep everything to myself because I was scared to speak out and because I was scared people wouldn't make fun of me and I was also scared of what people would think about me, like would they like me or would they think I'm I'm weird or not crazy but like just weird because I stutter and stuff like that.